So Fáilte, and this evening we are in our private core group class, and we have a members question that came in which I thought might be useful for recording in its own right. So Sharon asked, I've been building resources around European-based smoke ritual for a class, and even before I posted it, I had wanted to ask you, what do we know about smoke clearing or smoke blessing rituals in Irish traditions? Thinking about festival burns like Heather or Broom at Bealtaine, but what about smaller ceremony or more family, individual or medicinal practices? Erin Rowan Laurie mentions Glana in Weaving Word Wisdom as well as Seining. While I'd already known about some good material on Seining, I'm very curious what Glana is and how it's done, but can't find anything. What do you know about it? It seems Seining is more Scottish than Irish as well. Yep. So what I'm going to do is share my screen because I have pulled out quite a few resources just to go through. And of course, I haven't got them in any kind of order, so forgive me. So let's start with the Seining and Glana question. So Seining is specifically a Scottish... Seining is specifically a Scottish word. It means a little... Now, this is not my language, okay, just caveat. But my understanding is that it means a little bit more than just cleansing or, you know, clearing or anything like that. And it's links to magic or cures or spellcraft in some way, so I'm not 100% sure on that, but that is my understanding. There is a mention here of Glana, and that does, now the spelling is just a little bit different, but it does come from the Old Irish. So here we're looking at the screen, and we have the Electronic Dictionary of Irish Language, and Glana is an Old Irish word. And while it does, again, physically like have the meaning of cleansing or purification, as we'll see, there are a couple of other uses and references to it that make it a little bit more than that. So the first one is cleansing, purification, revision, correction of literary work, so also editing. And so to wash my hands in thy blood is one of the translations. A year of cleansing, which is interesting. So a year of cleansing comes from, let me just look at the bibliography, the monastery of Tala. So this was a purification process. I'm going to guess that either people generally or the monks specifically went through in the monastery of Tala. And the fine for non-cleansing of the road, so it's, you know, on a community level, to wash his hands of it. The water of expiation, so that's Ishka Glanta, and that one comes from Keating's Three Shafts of Death, so Geoffrey Keating, and is a Royal Irish Academy manuscript. So there's a couple of references there. So Ishka Glanta is the water of expiation. So we know that there is a ritualistic use to the cleansing and purification words, Glana. So there's also another meaning of clearing out or removing. So we have this from legal texts, the true removal to another chief. So it's literally like clearing the decks, that kind of thing, on a political level, on a societal level. There is another one legally, again, clearing oneself by oath. So again, there's a ritual kind of swearing. There is a legal swearing that can be done. This Glana seems to be like a modern equivalent, might be swearing on a Bible kind of thing, if you're that way inclined, in a modern court of law or on a religious text of your choosing. And eliding or elision. Okay, that's grammatical. So as we can see from that, there is definitely more to it than just physically washing your hands. That's definitely an aspect of it, but there's also the legal, the editing, so there's mental, political or social and spiritual elements to this term. So I think it is while we don't have a magical reference per se here attested, I think it's safe to say that there was a deeper meaning to the term. Be a little bit cautious here. So we do have in modern Irish, it's basically the same. So we have it from glán, and it would be Glanadh would be glana. So it's this one here, glana. Cleaning or clearance, cleaning up, mopping up, spring cleaning. So there's all that. Oh, the afterbirth, clearance of the afterbirth. So again, it hasn't really kind of translated into the modern in the same ritual framework or the same legal framework, but you can see, you can go through these. I'll put all these references in the notes below, and there are a lot of different uses to this, which again don't always quite match up with just physical cleansing. Okay. So, and the pronunciation is just, I'm not sure what the Old Irish pronunciation is, but certainly in modern Irish, it's just glán or glana. So, I'm not going to shut them down because then I won't have them and I'll have to go through them all again. So that's the terminology. The earliest references that I could find to the use of herbs and herbals in Irish. Now, I very firmly believe that herbs were being used from, you know, the first time people set foot on this island, okay? But I'm just talking sourced material that I could find rather than presumption or, you know, even common sense. So there is a thing called lovegurt. Lub would be herb, or love would be herb, L-U-B-H or L-U-B. And girth would be a field or a small garden, so lovegurt. And in prosperous households, there would be a separate garden set aside for medicinal plants. And the understanding being that the common people, or the less fortunate or less well-off people, would be gathering their herbs and gathering their plants from common sources. And actually there's a whole raft of legal stuff into later terms which actually govern. I think the law basically came down to, like, there was a lot of legal framework around not being able to take things for the individual that the community needed to benefit from as a whole. And our entire Brehon law system was basically set up around that everything that was going on, all the legal decisions of the Brehons, of the judges, were for the good of the community. So above the good of any one individual, including like anybody from any rank in society. So there were restrictions around what herbs you could collect and what plants you could take. There were fines for damaging trees. There was a lot of that kind of stuff that went on. But there was definitely provision within the legal system for any individual who had a medical need for either themselves or somebody that they were taking care of, or somebody in their community or their family, that they could gather what they needed for the cure. So if you were ever accused or brought up, and all you had to do was basically prove that the person that you were gathering for had a medical need for the herbs, and you know, that in and of itself, you know, you wouldn't have to gather vast quantities, you wouldn't have to clear a place out, you would just take what you needed. So that was allowed, and then anything else was greedy basically, and you know, against community well-being, so was very carefully controlled. So within these lovegurt, if you obviously were able to have the space and the time and the resources, if you were well off enough to have your own lovegurt, then you would be able to take what you wanted. Obviously, you wouldn't be covered by restrictions. You wouldn't have to travel to gather them, you know, all that kind of stuff. So that was seen as kind of a status thing, which very much translated into the monasteries then. And the Lovegirth were predominantly then became monastic. So people would travel to monasteries to get their cures. The monks had the time, had the space, had the skill to devote to growing and processing herbs medicinally. So that became kind of the community standard. And sometimes that was paid and sometimes that was charitable, and, you know, a mix of both. Depends on the abbot, I suppose, or the person in charge of the monastery. So all of that was going on. And that's the earliest kind of, I suppose, official herbal reference that I've been able to find. The Gaelic clans then had their own herbalists, they had their own physicians, like certainly from like the 1000s on in, and you had the specific leeches of each of the families, and there is definitely documentary evidence in later medieval times, certainly, of these herbal books that these leeches would collect, and different experiments and cures and all the rest of it. So they kept records. A lot of those books, though, were based on a text called Rosa Anglica. I did pull out a resource here. So it's on Celt, and this, and again, all these, I'll put links to all these in the notes below. So this is basically John of Gaddesden, who was English, I believe. This text, it was the first real attempt that I know of anyway to put together a complete kind of medical herbal medical system, if you like, to put it down on paper. And we think that it was published around 1314. Sorry, I'm just glancing down. I took a few notes here. I don't have dates in my head, unfortunately. All right, well, I do have them, but I have a hard time holding on to them. So a lot of the later Irish Gaelic medieval medical manuscripts, that's a mouthful, were based on tracts of Rosa Anglica. So this document here that that's on the Celt, the University College Cork website, goes into the history of the document. We're not going to go through it all right now, obviously, but there's a lot, all the different editions, the contents, 5 books in the first 3 editions. The second edition in 1502 is divided as follows. So we think that it first came into business in 1314. I believe John himself, John Gaddesden, was born in the late 1200s, 1280s maybe. I have that in my head. I haven't written that one down. See why I write down dates? So there's a lot that's from Latin. It would have been originally in Latin, I believe, and translated then in. So it goes through the different chapters are Tertiana, Sanguine Fever, Ephemera, Hectica, Cardiaca, and so on and so forth. Then there were Irish translations because it was very, very popular. So there's different translations, basically all the different manuscripts. So all that information is there, and the material that's in them, and, you know, what's illegible and what's going to actually be able to be translated and all that kind of stuff. So as time went on, these manuscripts got more and more involved. So with the use of herbs in this way, I think that there's a very good chance, let's you know, understate it in typical Irish fashion. I believe that there's a very good chance that these herbs were being used for smoke cleansing, for purification, as well as for infusion, boiling, you know, infusion or decoction, or poultices, or, you know, any of the ways that we're using herbal remedies now, tinctures, all that kind of stuff. That would have all been available to our ancestors as well. So I believe that it's a very, very good chance that all of this was, you know, that this knowledge wasn't just sitting there, right? And I also believe that while at this point it was moving into the upper echelons of society, the learned people, it was being written down in Latin and all the rest of it. You know, these people didn't just lick it up off the stones. They either learned it from somebody, they practiced it, they saw it in their community, they saw it in their family, and they would have had practical experience from people who were not necessarily the learned class, okay? Like, it all has to start somewhere, and there's roots of it. Katie says here, some herbs are best delivered through smoke for certain ailments, so it makes sense. Absolutely. So now let me just see what I have here. We're going to skip back a little bit from medieval times. Sharon has mentioned it, but I just don't want to kind of gloss over it. We do have very kind of concrete examples of purification with fire and with smoke from quite ancient Irish traditions. So this is what Sharon was mentioning about the community rituals and processes at Bealtaine and Samhain. Bealtaine particularly, and the summer solstice as well. So it was kind of the height of summer that a lot of this stuff was being done, which kind of makes sense because, you know, medicinally, it would have been when bugs and pests and that were at their height as well. Coming into Samhain, not so much, but definitely it was still done at Samhain as well. But the big ones were Bealtaine, which is May Day, and Midsummer, which then the traditions kind of moved over to St. John's Eve for that. So I just pulled out from Dukas. Now, sorry, before we even get to Dukas, I'm going to go back the way, not forward, sorry. I recommend Landscapes of Cult and Kingship, which is a paper by Roseanne Schott, which looks at monuments, myths, and other revelations at Uisneach. And this is available on Academia. So you just go in, you can download with Google, download with Facebook. It is a fascinating paper which gives you the practices at Uisneach. And the reason that I've pulled out the Uisneach one is because there is distinct archaeological evidence at Uisneach that there were 2 fires lit on the hill ritually at Bealtaine, we believe, because there's the archaeological evidence, which doesn't obviously give it a time of the year, but it ties very much with the folk tradition that has survived and with the mythology that has survived around it. So the archaeological evidence states that there were double bonfires basically being lit. And we know from living memory, from folk practices and traditions, that cattle were being driven between 2 bonfires. So they were literally being singed. Their hair was being singed with fire. They were being cleansed with fire as they were driven between these very hot, obviously, bonfires. But then there was also smoke purification and everything that would have been going on with that. So I do not doubt that the woods that were on these fires were not just some random shit that they picked up in the forest. I believe that for sacred sites and sacred times of the year and sacred rituals, that the woods would have been, the types of wood would have been very particularly chosen. And that is based on common sense. Again, I haven't got archaeological evidence for that, but if I went into the ethnobotanics or the ethnoarchaeology, I might be able to find that. I just haven't had the time or the resources to be able to dig that deep as yet. I definitely am fascinated by this topic, so it's one that I will continue to explore in my career and my community service. So anyway, Uisneach and also Rathcroghan have these traditions of cleansing and purification at sacred times of the year at these sacred sites with both fire and smoke. And there is also bleeding as well. The cattle were bled on the hills, on the mounds at these particular times of the year, and that was very much seen as a cleansing and purification process too. So just for, I haven't got a reference on screen for that, but what I do have is Charles Wilde, Oscar Wilde's father, wrote, I can't remember which document or which book it appeared in, but he definitely wrote about and described the bleeding of the cattle on the hills in the 1800s on Rathcroghan at the times of the year. And you know, he was a medical doctor. He was actually performed the first eye surgery in Europe, in the world maybe, but definitely in Europe. And he was fascinated by the medical benefits of this and all that kind of stuff. So he recorded that anyway. So that's the resource that I have just for that. Just that I don't like to give things and not tell you where I'm getting them from, right? I will, when stuff is my own kind of, this makes sense to me, I'll be very clear on that as well. So definitely look up Landscapes of Cult and Kingship, just to give you an idea of the cult, as in the practices, the ritual, the monuments, myths, and revelations from the archaeology at Uisneach, because that is a fascinating read. We have two more modern practices then with the fire. So I've mentioned Bealtaine, and we're talking very ancient times on Uisneach. I haven't got dates on that. It will probably be in Roseanne's paper. But right up to the, you know, the 1930s, the 1940s, when the schools collection was being recorded. And I'm just going to read this little bit out to you. Long ago, it was the custom on May morning at sunrise to bleed the cattle, and every person should taste the blood mixed with milk. Men and women were also bled, and their blood was sprinkled on the ground. This custom died out, but the children were still lifted through the fire when it was burned low, and the cattle were driven through the burning embers as in ancient times. Both children and cattle were passed through the fire to Moloch, and the young men still leap through the flames after the dance. Around the burning bush is over, and they carry home a lighted branch of the sacred tree to give good luck to the family during the coming year. So the May bush would usually be, the lighted bushes, the old man said, were first set up in honour of the great Milesians who gave battle on May Day with the Tuatha Danann. Interesting story there. Stop by a bush. I'm just actually trying to look. It doesn't give which bush specifically, but hawthorn or rowan, where hawthorn particularly for the May bush would be the association that I would have in that from other sources. So they say no thunder or lightning or evils can ever enter the house if the May bush is right outside it. People dance around it and drive their cattle and also the young children through the smoke to preserve them from all evils. So while that is a modern custom, it is very much based again on the ancient traditions, which again the archaeology is backing up. So I'm trying to give you the links through the centuries. And I just want to kind of remind you that the Irish tradition, very much like the Scottish, is syncretic practice. It's a fusion of time periods and a fusion of ideologies from both pagan and Christian times. And it is a living tradition. So what we have through archaeological evidence is very often backed up with the surviving folklore, even if it's surviving in a different form or an altered form to fit with the religious or social norms of the time. Okay, you can still find the roots of the practice that are there. So then we have, so that was Bealtaine. Then we have, and I haven't gone into a huge amount of the folklore. There are multiple examples on Dúchas, and I do a Folklore Friday video every Friday, most Fridays, on my YouTube channel. And around, you know, I have a Bealtaine one, I have a Midsummer one, so you can go and check various other versions of this lore. But just real quick here, long ago people used to light bonfires on this night. They used to also hunt the cows around the field with a burning bush. This was supposed to bring the cows to dairy. So as in, it was a practice that would bring up the milk in them or bring bring, increase their milk yield would be bring the cows to dairy, would be what that means. Okay. So, I don't know if I have any questions, just let me check. Lick it up off stones. Yeah. That's an old Irish, KV was just laughing at me. They didn't lick it up off the stones. That's an old Irish saying, and it's basically the Irish version of the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So a long time ago, my friends Ian and Sarah used to look at my children, and something would come out of their mouth that was pure me, and the pair of them would look at me and they go, so they've been licking stones again, have they? In this very sarcastic manner. But anyway, here you go. So I want to kind of move it on a little bit as well to again, medicinal, I think, purification practice with smoke, because it is a little, well, I don't know if it's well known or little known, but it was a tradition in Ireland from at least the 1700s on, but I believe that it's much older, but verifiably from the 1700s, sweat houses in Ireland were a very, very common thing. Now, originally we thought that they were particularly only up around the north and northwest, which would make sense with the climate if they were for medicinal use, because it is colder and damper up in that region of the island. But recent evidence has found more which they hadn't recognised as the remains of sweat houses. So we call them Teach Alais, which literally means sweat house in Irish. And you can see on the screen here, this is Crevabon in County Galway, so it's near Tuam. And this is a particularly fine example of it. So they're either round or square. I've seen both. And there's a small doorway and a corbelled roof. So corbelling is a stoneworking technique that basically has a ring of stones around the roof, and then, you know, gradually there's another layer of stones put in and it's moved in a bit, and another layer of stones put in, it's moved in a bit, another layer of stones. And it's exactly the same technique that was used to build the burial chambers, such as Newgrange, most famously. And inside the mounds, then this would be the stone structure, and then earth was packed on top of them. And in the Teach Alais, you would often have a sod, either turf or sod, earth, basically an earthen roof put over it to increase the insulation that was going on inside it. And you went inside. So this particular one, just to give you some context, it measures about 1.8 meters long by 0.7 meters wide. Not very big at all, these small little, this one is beside a holy well. And we think there's often, we know that there's often wells or lakes or pools, either man-made or natural springs, that are beside a Teach Alais, and we believe that it was basically used as a plunge pool. So you would go into the sweat lodge, the sweat house. Teach Alais, sweat lodge is a term that's obviously lodged in many, many people's brains. This could be, so I'm going to go out on a little limb here. This is me, right? There were definitive links between some Native American tribes and Native Irish, particularly when we were occupied by the English. There was a lot of, let's call it brotherhood, kinship, recognized between the oppressed Irish population and the oppressed Native American tribes. So this could have been an exchange of ideas, techniques, or it could have developed independently, because, again, you know, people have been using smoke medicinally for a hell of a long time, right? So I'm just, you know, pointing out that there could be a relationship between Native American or Indigenous First Tribes sweat lodge techniques and practices, and them having introduced that to Ireland or shared that with Ireland. or it could just be that, you know, this was another thing that we shared a kinship on because we both had this practice. Yeah, the sauna culture from up north too, or some combo of all of these. So obviously we had a big Viking influence here. So the Norsemen came and they would have brought practices and cultures with them as well. So there's no reason to believe that these practices or this knowledge that, you know, this was a thing that could physically help or cure or heal, that the native Irish wouldn't have, you know, like, we were not a nation of savages. We were vastly advanced, especially like coming through medieval times when the rest of Europe was in the Dark Ages. Our medical, legal, political, social learning and knowledge were top of the world in a lot of ways, or certainly of Europe, sorry. And, you know, people traveled from far and wide to come here and learn our practices, our techniques, and to share our knowledge. So I'm not in any way saying that this couldn't have developed independently, but as Sharon said, as you know, as I pointed out, there were other cultures which also had these practices, and they could have influenced each other. Okay, so here we have an image of a sweat house from County Derry, which has the grass roof over it, and it looks like a court cairn. And I think that is what happened archaeologically, maybe, that some of these mounds were either collapsed in and weren't visible in Munster. Maybe they weren't kept up and kept in good repair for as long as the ones up in the north and the northwest of the country were. Or, you know, who knows. But anyway, recent research carried out by Munster Archaeology has revealed a number of previously unrecorded examples in the south of the country, especially in counties Cork and Kerry. There you go. So this particular Crevabon sweat house is probably the finest example of a chalk alish, a sweat house in the country. And it was beside a monastery, but again, that may or may not be connected. So there is that tradition. Do I have any questions on that? Just Erica says, in my SC history course in grad school, we learned about the Scots-Irish aligning themselves in the Appalachian Mountains with the Native Americans before the American Revolution. Absolute refusal until the end of the war to get involved. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of shared kinship, a lot of, South Carolina, thank you. There's a lot of shared kinship, a lot of shared history with the tribes. And, you know, I'm very cautious about, this is historically attested, okay? This is not me, white lady, trying to claim Native ancestry or Native American practices as ours, okay? Not in any way, shape or form. And hopefully if you know anything about me, you'll know that. Are they directionally aligned like a Native American sweat lodge? I didn't know that Native American sweat lodges were directionally aligned. Let me just check that in this particular example. The longer part is east-west, and and this one is square. So if the longer part is east-west, then that would be the alignment, which means the doorway, I don't know, is the short answer to that now, and I'm not telling you a word of a lie. Okay, so I'm actually going to read this out. An 1800s account from Rathlin Island off the coast of County Antrim. Small buildings called sweat houses were erected, somewhat in the shape of a beehive, constructed with stones and turf, neatly put together, the roof being formed of the same material with a small hole in the centre. There was also an aperture below, just large enough to admit one person on hands and knees. When required for use, a large fire is lighted in the middle of the floor and allowed to burn out, by which time the house has become thoroughly heated. The ashes are then swept away. The patient goes in, having first taken off his clothes with the exception of his undergarment, which he hands to a friend outside. Now, very... the hole in the roof is then covered with a flat stone, and the entrance is also closed up with sods to prevent the admission of air. The patient remains within until he begins to perspire copiously, when, if young and strong, he plunges into the sea, but the aged or weak retire to bed for a few hours. Now, it doesn't say here, so I don't know is the short answer, or is the whole answer, I suppose, to that, but I can find out. Because there are multiple other examples, and it would be very easy, I suppose, to figure out if they were aligned directionally. My guess is if they're coming in from the 1800s, they wouldn't necessarily be, but there could have been older examples which didn't have stone. This type of a structure could be built relatively easy with a wooden frame and then sods put over the top of it. So the stone examples that we have may be the ones that survived where the earlier ones didn't. Again, that bit's presumption. Now, so we have talked about that. Uh-oh, just close down Rosanna. Whoops. Okay. Doors in the eastern Lakota and Ojibwe Lodge. Okay. If the one next to the church is in the same alignment as the church, then the entry should be to the west. That would make sense. What we can do is like map it out and figure it out. So I will definitely get back to you on that, okay? And see what we can make sense of. Now, where are we going next? With water. There isn't, oh sorry, just before we move on, an interesting one, while there isn't a particular tradition that I could find, that I could kind of source around burning herbs specifically, like individually. There is a very strong smoking tradition, which has the usual, like, you know, just people smoking within a community, smoking tobacco or whatever. But there's a couple of elements to the smoking tradition that I believe are memories of, now again, this is very much my supposition and kind of trying to join the dots, right? So the dots that we have that we could join are the dudgeon, the clay pipe was usually made specifically by one person within a community. That was their craft or their trade. So they would make these little clay pipes, okay? And there's a huge funerary tradition around them, in that the pipes would be smoked as part of the wake or the funeral, the remembering of the person, you know, the community gathering, all of that. Then those pipes would be broken. So they were made specifically for the funeral, and then they were sent on their way with the person. So that to me is a ritualistic act. So that's one dot, right? One dot. The other thing is that there is a very strong association with the fairies or the Shee or the other, the good neighbours with these pipes. And there's an example of that here, which I'm just going to read out from County Monaghan. There are a lot of forts in County Monaghan, and around these forts little pipes are found. Sometimes when men are ploughing in fields near these forts, one or two of these pipes are turned up. They are little pipes about 1 inch long and 1/2 inch across. They have wee thin shanks about 2.5 inches long. They are very peculiarly made little pipes. My grandfather told me that when the Tuatha De Danann were chased out of Ireland, they turned into fairies and went in under these forts and used to smoke these pipes. It is said that the smoke from their pipes cast a spell on anyone who chanced to stray across the fairies and disturb their revels. Other people say that when there was a plague, that people smoke herbs in them to keep away the plague. You would know by these pipes that they were not used for smoking, as in smoking tobacco, because they were too small and there was no tobacco at that time. The people keep these little pipes known as fairy pipes. Now, if that doesn't, that's a dot, right? But my thinking on it is, if that doesn't indicate a ritualistic or magical smoking tradition, then I don't know what does now, to be honest. So there's that, okay? I think that's all we have on smoke and fire. Let me just check what else I pulled out. Yeah. So the other thing then that I wanted to kind of look at was, and we're just finishing up now, we're coming to the end of what I have, is there wasn't specifically that I could find a water tradition. So the only kind of possibility, again, for a source, now it makes a whole amount of sense to me that water was used ritually and spiritually, okay? We have archaeological remains called Fulacht Fia. And the Fulacht Fia were, let me just describe them quickly for anybody who's not familiar. They are they're classed as an archaeological monument, basically, but they're a pit in the ground, and they would usually be beside a water source, so the water could either be diverted in or it would seep up and fill up this pit once it was dug. And a fire was lit beside it, and large stones or boulders were placed on the fire, and then when they heated up enough, they were tipped into the pit, and this would heat up the water. Now, there are multiple examples. The Mórrígan is connected to Fulacht Fia. Warrior gatherings are connected to Fulacht Fia. This could be, it was long thought that they were cooking pits, and we have done experiments, archaeological experiments, living history experiments rather, where whole, hanks of meat and stuff have been cooked within these Fulacht Fia. They may also have been used to brew beer. There were a lot of, there are a lot of sites that there are a number of pits that are kind of grouped or clustered together. The largest example of this would be at Rathcroghan or Croghan, which is a very, very ritualistic site, definitely. And there are these mystery pits which are man-made. They're not geological features, and they run all across the plains of Croghan. And they're about 3 or 4 feet deep and about 6 foot long, and maybe 3 foot wide. And there's all sorts of theories what these pits might have been used for. But one of the theories is that they could have been filled with water. They could, they would have, it is a limestone region, so they would have drained. But if there was a will to it, they definitely could have been used as ritual cleansing sites. Again, theory. Nobody knows. The best minds in the country have examined these pits. Some of the best minds in the country have examined these pits, and they are a huge mystery, but that is one of the possibilities. Okay. And the other remnant around washing or cleansing with water would be in Imbolc. So Imbolc, the original name on the spring festival, the original fire festival. So there were as you know, modern pagans, we talk about the eightfold wheel of the year, but actually in Ireland there were 2 sets of 4. So you had your community fire festivals, which started with Samhain and Bealtaine, so Halloween and May Day, which we've already mentioned as the primary kind of points of changeover of the year. They probably were the original, like pre-farming, pre-agriculture, pre-astronomy, pre-anything. They were probably the original, the change from summer to winter. And then the quarter of those would be the spring and the harvest, when we started getting into agriculture. But even before agriculture, you know, there would be fresh growth in spring, and there would be berries and wild fruits. And, you know, when you're talking about a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, there would be obvious bounty at spring and autumn, basically. So these are the community fire festivals, and Imolc is one of them. And this is the one at the start of February. So we have this spring festival, which the name is still a little bit of a mystery. So there are 2 possibilities for the name, the meaning of the name, or the source or the root of the name for Imolc. One is Mullig, which would be in the belly, and might refer to, you know, the pregnancies. If you got pregnant at Bealtaine as a human, which May Day festival, fertility rites, all that kind of stuff was going on, the pregnancy cycle would have fit very well with your seasonal cycle. So you would have been in your first and second trimester, you know, coming in through the autumn, and then come kind of Samhain and into the winter, you would have been in your 3rd trimester, and then you would have been ready to give birth in spring. So at a time when your physical labor was not specifically required as much over the winter, you would have been at the heaviest point of your pregnancy. So it kind of made sense for people to get pregnant at that time, which, you know, ties in with the whole May Day fertility, all that good stuff. But obviously people got pregnant at all times during the year. But when your survival depended on the work that you could do, the contribution that you could make to your community, to your family, all the rest of it, it kind of makes sense as well to time those pregnancies to a cycle that would fit with the workload that you needed to do to survive through the year, right? So Imolc could be in the belly, and obviously could also refer to animals who were preparing to give birth in spring. So that's one. The other one, which is the one of interest to us right now, is comes from the verb folk, which is F-O-L-C, which means to wash. And so folca, Shomer folca, is still a bathroom in modern Irish, a washroom rather. And folk, it would be, the grammar changes, but it's basically I wash, okay? And that is definitely a possibility for a root of Imolc, because pronunciation-wise they would sound pretty similar, Imolc or Imolc, just with a C or a G on the end. And in Old Irish, those kind of consonants were often interchangeable in a lot of ways. So, and sometimes the vowels too. There was no standardized language when it came to being written down, certainly. So linguistically, that is a possibility. So that could indicate a physical washing, a cleansing tradition. So folca would be, and let me just look up what the proper form of that. So if you're talking about Seining in Scottish tradition, we talked about glana is maybe a ritualistic cleaning. So folk means a downpour or a flood, or to bathe, to wash, to lave. So you do have these other connections. So it could be also to steep flax. And that's interesting actually, because you got the downpour, which would have filled up those pits, right? But one of the theories for the use of the pits in Rathcroghan, those mystery pits, was for flax production. So I hadn't realized that that was a little connection. Now, these are all very, very tenuous, okay? This is not in any way, don't be going, Lora O'Brien said this. Lora O'Brien is saying that these are dots, as I said, that we could possibly connect. So this has gone on for a very long time. I'm just going to quickly go through. The other question then is, that I wanted to kind of touch on, is which herbs. And there isn't, like, there's no, well, that I've found, there's no direct list of these are the magical herbs that our ancestors used, okay? Yes. I don't have a link for the flax production theory. That was, we know that flax is, was definitely in Ireland back in the day, and that was a theory that a visiting scholar to the centre, when I was manager of the centre, that was their working theory. So I can definitely look for a link, but I'm pretty sure I've never seen a resource on that. It was just something that occurred to me as I saw it there on the screen. But I will have a look for a source on that. Oh, the definition of folk. Yeah, absolutely. I will put these definitions into yes, I will. Okay. All this will be in the notes. Okay, so herbs. Sorry, just keep an eye on the chat there. The herbs that we have are not, as I said, there's no clearly defined list of these are the magic or these are the sacred herbs. Now, what we do have is there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple legal texts which protect certain herbs, certain trees, certain bushes, all of that. That would be maybe a later tradition. We can look at the native trees, shrubs, plants that were here. One of the earliest, actually I think maybe the earliest bush or shrub that populated Ireland, if I remember from my native trees research, was juniper. So literally when the glaciers retreated off the island like 9,000 years ago, they dropped seeds as they went. And juniper and hazel, I believe, are the earliest native trees that we have. If, that's what we're calling native, right? 9,000 years ago. So I do have a whole other class on native Irish trees, which goes into a lot of this, which obviously we don't have time for here. But just knowing that, I know that juniper would be a very, very good herb or wood or smoke to use. So using juniper berries on an incense block, even a charcoal block, would be a very good way to do that. And definitely, I don't know what it is. I think here juniper is not, like wild juniper or native juniper is not very common anymore. Its habitat has kind of been destroyed a little bit. Thanks, England. So we had a vast deforestation, obviously, in our island. Maybe not obviously, maybe you don't know. We did. And unfortunately, the juniper has been one of the casualties of that. So I wouldn't say go out and collect wild juniper in Ireland. I don't know what it's like where you are, but growing it yourself or using the berries is very good for making into an incense or a smoke producing herb. That makes sense. So some other references that I have found, I was looking for, oh yeah, smoke use specifically, and I came across a cure for the whooping cough. Inhale the smoke of a burning hoof in a blacksmith's forge. Now that's not a herb, obviously, but the blacksmith is particularly associated with ancient magic and protection. So I believe that that has as much a magical as a medicinal. Now, how much medicinal value you get from inhaling a burning hoof, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to give you medical advice on that, right? But the blacksmith's forge element is definitely a magical protection. So I thought that was interesting. We're looking up Lovina August Plandi, so that's herbs and plants, and this is Oscailga. And it mentions, some of them are translated, so we have burdock, watercress, bog bean, day nettle, dandelion, nettle, moss, bog moss, juniper, Kirachin, bog or mountain myrtle, St. Patrick's cabbage. Now, I have no idea what St. Patrick's cabbage is, but there you go. Mulberries, Freya-con, I know is heather, mushrooms, chickweed, ripplegrass, and scutchgrass. And there's more. Peter moss, yeah, absolutely. So these are all, let me just, yeah. So cures in connection with trees is the page before that. So there's some that's been translated. So this is the trees that are growing around here, basically. So these are lists that people have kind of collected locally. So that's that. Then herbs. So mugwort, when I came across references to mugwort, it was particularly around infusion, boiling it. So this one's from Portumna in County Galway. Mugwort is strong enough to intoxicate people. Now that could be a reference to smoke, or it could be a reference to drinking it. It's an old saying: if a footman put mugwort in his boots in the morning, he may go 40 miles before noon and not be weary. So that's an interesting one. And there is a load of stuff. You look up any herb in the school's collection and you'll find some reference to somebody using it for something. Okay. Okay, so this one is rowan. By far and away, the rowan is one, either berries or wood, is one that's used magically for protection. So the branches of a rowan specifically would have helped, I believe, with, I don't know how well rowan smokes, but if you were using smoke for any kind of protection or warding or anything like that, rowan would be a good one. Or if you're making an incense, having rowan berries in it would be a good one. So on this day, many people cut tiny pieces of the rowan tree. I'm just going to actually check myself there, because I have not checked out the medicinal properties of rowan. I know mugwort, before you ingest anything, either by smoke or by infusion or decoction, please, please, please check with a herbalist or a doctor, or check your sources before you go and start ingesting these things or inhaling these things, okay? So let's just get that out of the way. I am not a doctor. Just play one on TV. Oh, okay, cool. St. Patrick's cabbage is saxifrage. Caboche the Madra Rua. That means fox's cabbage as well. Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you, KB. Sharon says, cedar, juniper, sage, mugwort, I believe all share a chemical component to Joan, which I think is interesting given their ceremonial context around the world. And KB says, I'm a herbalist if anyone wants assistance. Thank you. Sharon's asking, you can't eat raw rowan berries, right? I'm pretty sure you can't. That was what checked me. There was something about don't eat rowan berries. So I know that the hawthorn is safe, definitely, and the hawthorn would be another one that's associated with protection as well. Yes, our herbalist confirms you don't eat raw rowan berries. Hawthorn berries are actually quite good for you. They regulate your heart, whether it's not working properly or working too fast, they will actually regulate it. So they're quite magical in medicinally as well as from the folklore tradition. But this, taken the tiny pieces of the rowan tree and small pieces of the wax candle blessed on Candlemas Day. Now that's an interesting connection as well, because Candlemas Day would be the Christian tradition around Imbolc. So you're blessing the wax candle at Imbolc. So you've got the spring festival and the rowan tree right there. Roll them in red flannel and tie them into cows' tails. So another version of that, which is really, really common, is a cross made from rowan twigs that's tied with red thread. So the red is associated with the other world specifically, and it is being used as a warding in this. So to ward off bad luck to the cattle, sickness, and to prevent persons from taking your milk or your butter. The custom of tying these articles on the cows prevails in Lavey to this day. So Lavey is a place in Cavan. People also put the rowan branch and blessed candle over the byre door. There you go. So Kaylee says some cedars do not contain thujon and rowan berries have to be cooked. Okay, so just on the very last one here, a rowan ring around the churn staff keeps away witches. So the fumes of burning slat alum is also a cure for cows. So again, I'm not sure what slat alum, slop. Just see if I can find a reference to that. No, I didn't mean slop. What's alum? An alum is a type of chemical compound. Okay. What is burning slop alum? I think slop is an Irish word. Let me just check that. A rod. Oh, hang on. Alum. It might be spelled wrong. Yeah, there we go. So what we've just found, with a little bit of research, a little bit of knowledge of the Irish language, the fumes of burning slop alum is also a cure for cows. So what this means is a pine stick, basically. And that's really interesting because I know that in Scottish Seining practices, pine needles or pine wands are used specifically. So there you go, research on the fly. Yes, so there is our, well, one wormwood. Where'd you see wormwood? Okay, so burning pine branches or pine sticks. Absinthe had wormwood in it. Absinthe did, yes. Oh, because you mentioned absinthe. Okay, sorry. My apologies. Yes. So hopefully that has been of use to you. And like I said, I will keep all of these various links open and I will put them together in a document and put them into the notes section in your curriculum. If you're a core member, which is our Inner Circle program, which only opens once a year through the Irish Pagan School. So watch out for messages in January about that. We take a very limited number of students in every year. or if you are watching this on YouTube, it will be in the resources will be in the notes below, okay, in the comments below. Okay, so have we any other questions about that? Has it helped in any way? I am going to finish up this recording here, and if you're watching this on YouTube, check out the irishpaganschool.com, and there's free and paid resources up there, and you can get in on this action, okay? So slán go fóill, and I will see you in the next video.